Hello and welcome. I'm Ramesh Ramachandran and you're watching Gravitas on WION, the only Indian channel with a global perspective that brings you top stories from South Asia. So here are the global headlines trending at this hour. Theresa May faces first Brexit bill defeat as House of Lords votes for amendment. Saudi Arabia and Indonesia sign deals as King Salman starts landmark visit. Pyongyang warns of strong response to US-South Korea drills. And Roger Federer stunned by world number 116, yes, 116th ranked Yevgeny Donskoy in Dubai. Welcome. Tonight we'll take a hard look at the Saudi King's visit to Southeast Asia. Joining me for the discussion is Ambassador Mahesh Sachdev and my colleague and WION's international correspondent Daniele Pagani. And from Islamabad, WION's Pakistan Bureau Chief Taha Siddiqui will join us in a bit. And also Marina Mahathir, daughter of the former Malaysian Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad from Kuala Lumpur. Thank you all and welcome to Gravitas. But first, let's take a moment or two to get to know a little bit about the monarch and his ongoing visit. Now, at $21 billion, Saudi Arabia's King Salman is the world's third richest monarch, according to Forbes. He landed in Indonesia on Thursday on a 9-day visit on a luxuriously fitted and well-appointed Boeing aircraft with "God bless you" painted on the nose and a gold-plated escalator from which the king regally descended to a warm welcome from Indonesia's President Joko Widodo. But the king did not come alone. His 620-man entourage followed in 6 other aircraft. There was 500 tons of luggage, including 2 Mercedes limousines and 10,000 security staff to guard the king. And on that note, I want to bring in my guests, Ambassador Sachdev and Daniele, into the discussion tonight. I'll go to Ambassador Sachdev first and then come to you, Daniele. Ambassador Sachdev, I know what I'm going to ask you might not fall strictly in your domain as a diplomat, but I can't help but ask you. I want you to talk a bit about the opulence of the Saudi Arabian royals, the pomp and pageantry that accompanies a royal visit. Also a little bit about the House of Saud itself and how monarchy has fared in Saudi Arabia and how it is looked at by other countries in the region and beyond.
Thank you, Ramesh. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Welcome, sir.
Al Saud have been a strong force in Saudi Arabia. I hesitated because the name comes from Al Saud itself. It's the 3rd time they are in power in Riyadh over the past 3 centuries. So there is a certain amount of consistency, a certain amount of acceptance. Al Saud have been in power this time from 1902 when King Abdulaziz overthrew the previous incumbent. Most remarkable feature of this century and 15 years of their stay has been consistency, has been prosperity that they have brought to Saudi Arabia, as well as stability.
Right.
I think they need to be given credit for it. Thanks.
Also, Ambassador Sachdev, put the Saudi Arabia-India relations in perspective for the viewers of WION tonight. What do we know about the Saudi royals and their worldview?
I think it's been evolving. And two impetuses work on their worldview.
Right.
First is Islam, and India as possibly the second largest Muslim population and second largest Sunni Muslim population has deserved their attention. Secondly, in oil as well,
right.
It's right now a buyer's market, and India as the second largest buyer of Saudi crude needs to be taken seriously.
All right, coming to you, Daniele. Talk us through, if you will, about the Saudi monarch's ongoing visit to Southeast Asia and East Asia. He is visiting Indonesia, he'll be visiting Japan, China and Maldives. Now, talk us a bit about the agenda or the likely agenda of his visit to these countries in the region.
I think there are several elements through which we have to analyze this visit. There is a political element, there is an economic element, right, and there is a religious element. Saudi Arabia, for instance, has, we could say in a provocative way, that has bought the Maldives, is the largest investor in the Maldives. The Bin Laden group has recently won an enormous auction for implementing a new terminal in the Maldives International Airport. So they are seeking to diversify their market. They know that oil will not last forever, and they need to diversify and to seek investment in large Muslim countries. So this is why they are visiting Indonesia. They are seeking to strike a deal with a major player in Indonesian oil market. When it comes to China and Japan, they are probably trying, and most likely they will success, to seek investment for the IT sector. So they need technology. They need to improve their technological access to the world. Then I said religion. Yes, religion plays a big role. The Maldives is a Muslim country, majorly Sunni. Indonesia is the largest Sunni country. So absolutely, they are also seeking to implement and to expand the Wahhabi version of Islam, which is the official version of Islam, which is in Saudi Arabia.
Fair enough. Ambassador Sachdev, he's visiting or will visit Maldives, of all countries, in our neighborhood. Why do you think he gave India a miss? Or what should we read into it?
I think India has been covered earlier. As Crown Prince, King Salman had visited India in 2014, just 2 years ago, and had signed Defence Cooperation Agreement, which redefined our relations. I have reasons to believe that he may come to India later this year.
Is it? Okay, fair enough. All right, gentlemen, let's take our discussion forward by now taking a look at the Saudi king's ongoing visit to Southeast Asia. So, what has brought King Salman to Indonesia, the world's largest Muslim country? It's a little odd that it has taken a Saudi royal 47 years to go there. It would seem the Saudis are reaching out to neglected corners of the Muslim world to counter the appeal of the Islamic State. Now, let's talk a bit about the Saudi-Pakistan ties. Now, from an Indian point of view, however, the Saudi visit to Indonesia would be less important. What interests India is the long-standing Saudi ties with Pakistan. Now, Islamabad has publicly steered clear of any entanglement with the Saudi alliance against Yemen, but media reports have highlighted the presence of at least 1,000 Pakistani troops in Saudi Arabia. And bilateral ties date back to the 1960s when Pakistan militarily helped the Saudis in the Yemen civil war. Also, Riyadh has provided billions of dollars in aid to Pakistan. Ambassador Sachdev, I want to get a sense from you about the Saudi-Pakistan dynamic, as it were, and what it might mean for India.
I think there are elements of overlap. Initially, when India was united before partition, Saudis had a simplistic view of India and Indian role in Islamic world. After partition, I think they were initially favorable to India, but when Pakistan became part and parcel of the Western military alliances, the tilt towards Pakistan has come on to being, and it has stayed that way. However, there are clear issues on which they favor India. For example, Indian community in Saudi Arabia is the largest expatriate community. Trade with India, which is $27 billion in the last year, was many-fold of their trade with Pakistan. The investments in Pakistan are higher, but they are mostly in housing and other sectors where individual members of Al Saud or richer Saudi folks have bought houses, etc., etc. I think there is certain amount of disconcertation about terrorism and extremism in Pakistan. Well, in that context, from Pakistani side, there are some who regard Saudi influence as something that promotes radicalization and extremism in Pakistan. So it cuts both ways. You have already mentioned how Pakistanis have stayed clear of Yemeni campaign, where 10 countries have joined Saudi Arabia in intervening in the civil war in that country, which is going nowhere in a hurry. I think from our perspective, Prime Minister's visit last year in April can be seen to have redefined the relationship, particularly after similar forays with UAE and Qatar.
Indeed. Before I go across to WION's Pakistan Bureau Chief Taha Siddiqui in Islamabad, I want to bring Daniele. Daniele, what do you think underpins the Saudi-Pakistan relations? Is it Islam, religion? Is it the economy, trade? Or is it Pakistan's nuclear status? Or is it a bit of everything?
I think it's a bit of everything. It's a long-standing relation. It's not that it's coming into being right now, so it has a long tradition. They have been allies on many issues for a long time, and I think religion plays a very big role, and it's playing more and more role, also because Saudis are proven to finance madrasas and mosques and trying to spread, yes, a radical version of Islam. And so this generosity also on the common ground of religion plays a major role in very strong ties, maybe even stronger than economic ties. I don't think, nevertheless, that India needs to be worried about this. It's not going to play in India's disfavor because, as Ambassador told, India is the second largest buyer of Saudi crude, and this is way more important than any other relation. Probably.
Absolutely. Ambassador Sachdev, I want to ask you, do the Saudis see the Pakistanis maybe as the ultimate insurance if their hold weakens going forward?
I think Saudi Arabia has in the past relied on Pakistan as one of major Protean guards. They have had, after Islamic Revolution in Iran, they've had Pakistani troops on their soil in large number. However, that experiment did not produce desired results, and eventually, after nearly a decade of Pakistani troops being stationed in significant numbers on Saudi territory, they were all sent back. And despite various threats to Saudi securities through other challenges such as terrorism and Arab Spring, etc., they haven't resorted to the same.
Right. I want to bring in WION's Pakistan Bureau Chief Taha Siddiqui into the discussion now. Good evening, Taha. Is the Pakistani media at all covering the Saudi king's visit?
Well, there are some reports about it, given the fact that Pakistan and Saudi Arabia enjoy a close relation. And then Indonesia is the largest Muslim population country, so because of which it is being covered, but not as that extensively in the media that I see.
Also, Taha, how would you describe contemporary Pakistan-Saudi Arabia relations?
Well, Pakistan and Saudi Arabia enjoy a very close relation, and it's because of the fact that we know Nawaz Sharif was in exile in Saudi Arabia when Musharraf ousted him in '99. Saudi Arabia offered him refuge. So in that sense, the Pakistani ruling family right now, Nawaz Sharif's family, has very close ties with Saudi Arabia. Other than that, there are military ties also. Pakistan sells small arms and has done many deals with the Saudis for selling them small arms manufactured in Pakistan. Other than that, we see a big sort of social interaction and sort of connection, given the fact that there is the holy cities and a lot of Pakistanis visit those holy cities in Saudi Arabia. And not just that, a lot of labor from the 70s, since the time of Bhutto, have been migrating to Saudi Arabia, to the Middle East, and specifically to Saudi Arabia. So a major part of Pakistani remittances comes from Saudi Arabia. And we know Pakistan economy is largely based on these remittances, and especially from the Middle East, and especially from Saudi Arabia.
All right, now I want to pause and dwell a bit on the relations between and among three key players: Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Iran. Now, there appears to be intense competition between Saudi Arabia and Iran over Pakistan. A Brookings Institution report last year said that there were 285 madrasas in Pakistan receiving foreign funding. Now, 1/3 were being funded by Iran and 2/3 by Saudi Arabia. In Punjab province alone, 122 madrasas are Saudi-backed, while 22 only are Iran-backed. A lot of Saudi money flows into Balochistan and Peshawar. Iranian money mostly ends up in Gilgit-Baltistan, where Shias predominate. Ambassador Sachdev, how would you characterize the tug of war, as it were, between Saudi Arabia and Iran for regional supremacy? What is the dynamic of the Saudi Arabia-Iran relations generally, and in relation to Pakistan particularly?
I think the competition is a misnomer. They have their own lobbies, and that stems from about 15 to 20% of subcontinent's population,
right,
Muslim population, being Shia, and rest being Sunnis. Although Shias are numerically proportionately smaller, but in numerical terms, Pakistani Shias are the largest number of Shias outside Iran. So that naturally becomes an object of covetation for Tehran, and they have been under certain amount of stress due to rise in Sunni fundamentalism and rise in tendencies which at the extremist end regard Shias as heretics. And you have various groups which remain rampant, which take pride in announcing attacks on Shia installations, Shia mosques and prayer congregations, etc. The last being Mast Qalandar's function only last month, where more than 80 people were killed, prompting Pakistan Army to launch a containment drive. On the other hand, Saudis tend to support what they believe is the purest Sunni Islam, Wahhabism, and although Wahhabism is relatively unknown initially in subcontinent, but through these kind of donations, etc., and seminaries, madrasas support, they have come to become a force, especially in Pakistan.
Fair enough. Daniela, you've covered West Asia for some time now. If I were to ask you, what do you think ails the region? Is it the Saudi Arabia-Iran rivalry, the so-called Sunni-Shia rivalry, or is it more political or more geostrategic in nature? Also, importantly, how does it impact the other countries in the region and beyond?
I would go as far as saying that the rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia, not only these two countries, but majorly these two countries, impacts extensively the whole area of West Asia. I would also go far by saying that I would like to downplay a lot the role of religion. It's a struggle for hegemony, political hegemony and economic hegemony on a region. Iran is playing the same game. Iran has militias in Iraq fighting right now, in Syria fighting right now, is paired up with Lebanon. The idea is to create a so-called Shia belt which goes from Tehran through Iraq and Syria up to Lebanon. I don't think this is really a religious willingness. I think more that Iran would like to establish itself as the major power in the region, and obviously Saudi Arabia, which enjoys extensively since years an enormous influence on the region, is trying to counterattack them and is trying to tackle this willingness of Iran to become the major leader.
Right. Coming to you, Taha, how would you compare Pakistan's relations with Saudi Arabia on the one hand and Iran on the other hand? Is there any comparison at all, or do you think the dynamic is undergoing a slow change?
Well, Pakistan shares a border with Iran, and despite that, it is not very friendly when it comes to Pakistan-Iran relations, given the fact that, as we just heard the discussion, that Pakistan has aligned itself more with the Sunni Wahhabi version of Islam, which is practiced in Saudi Arabia. And the fact that Saudi Arabia has been richer in the past, that we've seen that because of the oil economy that they have, it has been supporting the Pakistani economy, the Pakistani army, the Pakistani government, and the people here through their madrasa networks, as you mentioned also. And Iran, on the other hand, does not have that kind of capacity, given the fact that it was facing international sanctions and its own economy was in trouble. So Pakistan, from the beginning, has sort of allied itself with Saudi Arabia, and we saw that alliance really emerging out during the Afghan jihad, when the Saudi money and the American planning came in, and the Afghan jihadis were created. And ever since then, Saudi Arabia has been quite involved in Pakistan, and because of which there's been a consequence that Pakistan is facing with right now in the form of radicalization of the Pakistani population. Killings of Shias are on an increase in the country, and because of which Iran has repeatedly complained and has tried to reach out to Pakistan, but despite its outreach and sort of an attempt to normalize relations, Pakistan seems to be hung on allying itself with Saudi Arabia.
Indeed, we have a very interesting conversation going. Now I want you gentlemen to focus on another key question. Could Pakistan hand over some of its nuclear assets or weapons to the Saudis? Western analysts believe there are huge constraints the Saudis must resolve first. For instance, Saudi Arabia has no capacity to handle nuclear weapons on its own. It lacks the qualified engineers and sophisticated infrastructure. It cannot buy a nuclear bomb and expect to keep that secret. Foreigners run vital sectors of the economy and are even present in military installations. Also, Pakistan runs the risk of sanctions and isolation if it transfers nukes to the Saudis. Ambassador Sachdev, your thoughts on the regional dynamic here. Is it a tightrope walk for India vis-a-vis Saudi Arabia on the one hand and Iran on the other hand, also in terms of energy security or connectivity with Afghanistan, for instance?
I think you touched on a few very critical issues in your immediate presentation. There have been all sort of speculations about nuclear transfer from Pakistan to Saudi Arabia. The Saudi defense minister was the first Prince Sultan was the first to be allowed to visit, first foreigner to officially visit Kahuta. I think it was about a decade ago, where he described Pakistani nuclear capacity as Islamic bomb and not Pakistan's own. That had led to some speculation. As you have pointed out, this ambiguity may be deliberate, because actual transfer of nuclear hardware from one nuclear state to a non-nuclear state is relatively unheard of.
Right.
And it will involve its own consequences, which may invoke sanctions and proliferation issues and so on. Even from Saudi side, the ambiguity might be better than as a deterrence than actual transfer, which cannot be then used. As it is, nuclear weapons are supposedly only for deterrence.
Right.
When it comes to India's own triangular relationship with Iran and Pakistan, Iran and Saudi Arabia,
Right.
I think we have been fairly successful in playing both ends. We do have significant Shia population of our own, and we do have historic ties dating back to Mughal civilization and beyond with Iran. Saudi Arabia again has custody of two holiest shrines of Islam and has its own primordial role
Absolutely.
in that manner. Oil-wise, the game has become very interesting. Iran has climbed after sanctions to be India's third largest supplier of crude instead of seventh largest supplier in 2015. It's now third. And in October last year, in fact, it had supplied more crude to India than any other country.
Mm-hmm.
I think Iranians want to recapture Indian market, where they used to be number 2. Interestingly, Iraq used to be number 1 those days when there were no sanctions to blight the bilateral trade. I think Iran has its own plus points, population-wise, lack of development-wise, pent-up demand for consumer goods and so on.
Right.
And the stalled modernization drive, which sanctions have only lifted after 3 decades, has boosted its buying power. On the other hand, Saudi Arabia, through its economic transformation program, NTP, wants to transform itself
Right.
beyond oil by 2030. In next 15 years, it wants to be a major economic player beyond oil.
Sure.
It wants more than half of its exports to be non-oil by 2030. Right now, they are only 10% of the total.
Sure.
So that also presents a lot of opportunities. I should also mention an elephant in the room in the form of IPO of Aramco, which is supposed to come in the later part of this year. It would be the biggest IPO in the world with $100 billion as the likely revenue. And that is concentrating a lot of minds in during the visit, especially to China and Japan.
Fair enough. Daniel, very quickly, the Islamic State is on the retreat in West Asia. Now, how will the region look like in the next few years?
Well, the Islamic State is on retreat in Iraq. They're losing ground in Iraq. They are pretty solid right now in Syria. They are yes, they are not enjoying a good moment, but the road is very long. So even when the Islamic State will be defeated, how the area will look like, it will really depend on how these hegemony struggle with several regional powers will develop. Will Turkey play a role? Will Saudi Arabia play a major role? Will Iran play the major role? It really depends on what kind of agreement and who wins what.
Absolutely. And quickly going across to Taha. Taha, we were discussing the nuclear issue. Now, does Pakistan still view or justify its nuclear arsenal purely in terms of an Islamic bomb?
Well, we've seen that Pakistan has been sort of propagating it in that sense, and even the proxies that it has, the non-state actors in Pakistan, also use that particular term. And then we've also seen Pakistan involved in sort of black market operations when it comes to the nuclear market, in which we saw A.Q. Khan being accused, and then General Musharraf. Then there was this whole investigation of how some nuclear secrets were sold to Korea, Libya, and other countries around the world. So in that sense, the Pakistan's sort of nuclear option, the way it uses it as a strategy in the region with vis-a-vis with India, and then with regards to the religious aspect of it and its alignment with Saudi Arabia, all of that does play a role in Pakistan's nuclear regime.
Right. Ambassador Sachdev, now how does India look at the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, or OIC, and Saudi Arabia's role in it? Is it an anomaly that India, in spite of being among the top few countries with a large or sizable Muslim population, is not even an observer in the organization?
I think it is for historic reasons that this happened. 1970, after Al-Aqsa bombing, OIC was formed, and the first conference in Rabat actually invited India to be its full member, and an Indian delegation presented its credentials, was received by the host chairman, King Hassan II of Morocco. But then President Yahya Khan of Pakistan said that if India is invited, they are not going to participate, and he refused to participate in the summit, although he was actually in Rabat. That sent everyone in a tizzy, and it was then decided that it was better to have Pakistan in and India out. And we reacted very angrily, and the diplomatic relations with Morocco were severed. Since then, we have had no truck for membership or observer status with OIC, and I think it also does not go along with our secular status to be a member of a club which is by definition religious in nature.
But do you think it will help India in the immediate term to moderate the OIC's positions on issues of immediate concern to India? Won't India be better off inside the tent, as it were, and not outside of it?
OIC being a loose club which does not criticize any of its own member, what you're saying may be tactically correct. But then would it allow that kind of trend to redevelop and reset itself when it has already taken a partisan view of what is happening in Jammu and Kashmir, what is happening vis-a-vis Indian minorities, Babri Masjid and everything else? It has not hesitated over the past 2 decades in issuing all sort of statements, and those statements do not pave the way for any similar gesture on the lines that you have suggested.
All right.
On our part.
Fair enough. Before I go across to Ms. Marina Mahathir, the daughter of the former Malaysian Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad. I want to quickly come to you, Daniele, very quickly. One last question now. Talking about Trump's policies or West Asia policy going forward, we've already seen him make some assertive comments vis-a-vis Iran, for instance. How would that play out in the region, especially given India's interests in Iran as of today?
So, we first of all have to say that it is not clear yet what is Trump's policy in the Middle East. It was supposed, I mean, the generals, Mattis, say that they delivered this plan to defeat ISIS and to find a way out the Middle East scenario, but it's not public, so we don't still know. What is certain is that Mr. Mattis is an old rival of Iran. He considers Iran the main and major destabilization factor within the area. So probably, but again, I repeat, we don't know because it is not clear what the Trump administration wants to do in West Asia. Probably we will see the United States of America, the presidency, not to tie up with Iran and probably to sideline once again with the House of Saud, which is anyway one of their key strategic players in the area.
All right. On that note, I want to quickly go across to Ms. Marina Mahathir, who joins us from Malaysia. Now, Ms. Mahathir is an activist and a writer. She is the daughter of the 4th Prime Minister of Malaysia, Mahathir Mohamad. Good evening, Ms. Mahathir. Now, Saudi Arabia's King Salman is currently visiting your region with a huge entourage and will remain in Asia for an entire month. You have often warned of Arab colonialism in Malaysia. Does that warning extend to the entire Southeast Asian region? If so, are your own Islamic scholars doing anything about it?
Well, they claim to be, but I think it's not very effective because they're giving out mixed messages. Because on the one hand, they're talking about how people should not go off and join ISIS, and very concerned about potential Malaysian recruits for ISIS and all that. But at the same time, they're also extremely conservative and not very tolerant of anything that is not part of the Sunni sect of Islam. So, it's people are getting very, very mixed messages about this. Some of the people have been noticing that Malaysian Muslims have been more and more taking on Arab forms of dress, even Arab forms of speaking. Most of us do not speak Arabic, but some people, perhaps to show their Islamic credentials, will start a speech in Arabic without translating it, and all these types of moves. Plus, an almost rejection of our own local culture. There's a lot of Malay culture that's been banned or downgraded or neglected, etc. So I feel very much that we're losing our identity and becoming more and more Arab, which is very, very alien to our culture here. I see that a little bit also in other parts of Southeast Asia, Muslim parts of Southeast Asia. But I think it's probably more obvious here in Malaysia because we are, a great majority are Muslim and we're a much smaller country.
But does this Arab colonialism target women in particular? Have there been sudden new diktats on how to dress, how to speak and what to speak?
Not quite so obvious. I think the most obvious is in the way that some women dress. Suddenly you see a lot of women favoring the long kaftan-like outfit rather than our traditional outfit. It may be just fashion or out of comfort, but still, to see so many and completely neglecting our own traditional outfits is a bit worrying.
Right.
But also, I've started to see quite a few niqabs, which is the face covering, which is completely alien to our culture, and I'm just wondering where it came from. But apart from that, I think that we've made so many forward strides since independence. It's very hard to roll that back. So nobody has dared to suggest, for instance, that women in Malaysia cannot drive.
Right.
And that sort of thing. But still, in terms of personal laws, that is where my organization works in, and we are very worried about these trends.
Now, Ms. Mahathir, on a scale of, say, 1 to 10, to what extent is Saudi Arabia itself responsible for this radicalization? Does the inspiration come from this one country or for different reasons?
I think it's many, many reasons. I think they are a factor. Perhaps they are about a 5. And then I think, things like the economy, we're all suffering. There are lots of very listless young men who have nothing much to do and get attracted by these types of ideologies, so to speak. Plus a government that is politicizing religion. They're in a race with the opposition to see who is more Islamic. So it's many, many factors. It all combines together to move towards this type
Fair
of,
enough.
I guess, radicalization, if you like.
Now, talking about the Sisters of Islam, have you been allowed to continue the judicial review in the High Court by an appeals court of a fatwa issued against your organization as un-Islamic? Now, do you have widespread support for your petition to the secular court to review this religious order both in Malaysia and elsewhere in Southeast Asia?
Well, I wouldn't call it widespread. There are certainly many people watching it, and we're certainly very happy with the unanimous decision by the Court of Appeal judges to continue with the judicial review.
Okay.
But we face challenges all the time. Even the fact that the fatwa is supposedly on hold doesn't stop sermons being made against us and all sorts of other attempts to harass us every day, just to stop us from doing what we do. So, it was a good day today, but I think we still face a long challenge, and I'm sure it will not be easy once we go back to court to actually hear the judicial review substance.
Right. Is this new? Do you feel that these recent fatwas against sisters in Islam, do you feel that the growing Saudi influence has led to a simultaneous rise in such fatwas?
Yeah, I do think that it's been more in the past 10 years or so. Partly because of all the other circumstances. It's not just the Saudi influence, I think it's all the rest. It's particularly the politicization of religion in this country, and the competition, so to speak, between the government and the Islamist party. But also now at stake, because of the government losing the 2/3 majority in parliament, they're trying to win back the rural voters who are mostly Muslim, and they think that this is the way to do it. And so they've mounted a campaign against pluralism, liberalism, Shias, and all sorts of things, all very similar to Saudi-style Islam. And we are caught in it, and we are a very big target because we are women talking about religion. We've been around for so long. So we're not unused to this type of harassment.
Okay. All right. Now the Saudi Arabian monarch is visiting the region. Now his visit is touted to be focused on oil deals, investments, business. But is that all there is? I mean, would you say that there is more to this than more to his month-long visit than meets the eye? After all, he's also going to the Maldives, where too there is growing Wahhabism.
Well, I'm no expert on this. Yes, I think there is probably a different agenda, but not necessarily a very conscious one. It's probably giving an image to the population, the Muslim population here, get impressed by the huge entourage and the money being thrown around, and and all that, and somehow they think that this is all equated with Islam.
Right.
So I think it's it's kind of a PR campaign, if you like, to promote a certain brand of Islam, with no consideration that our part of the world is very, very different from certainly Saudi Arabia.
But I mean, so it's spending so much money aimed at impressing people at the grassroots level, particularly in the hope of making their brand of Islam more attractive, people who benefit from this delegation and are dependent on tourism, for instance?
Well, I don't know how much of that money is getting to the grassroots. I mean, they are staying in luxury hotels, which the grassroots don't normally go to. There might be a waiter or two who gets a big tip. But it's just the overall impression. And, I think a lot of Asians have this thing about, this big man syndrome. That if he's a big man, then he's entitled to all these luxuries and all these privileges and all that. And that's very impressive to the grassroots. So, yeah, and it's being spun politically here in Malaysia. Our Prime Minister is saying, why can't we have goods and services tax? Saudi Arabia is about to have it. We give out this one-off payment to poor families. Well, look, Saudi Arabia is about to do it. So everything is being held in relation to Saudi Arabia. So in a way saying that if they're doing it, it must be a good thing. And implicitly, it must also be an Islamic thing.
All right. On that note, I want to thank you, Ms. Mahathir, for joining us on Gravitas tonight. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us on these developing issues. Now, if I can quickly bring my guests back into the discussion, there we heard Ms. Mahathir speak about her thoughts or her views on the Saudi monarch's ongoing visit and what she thinks of Saudi Arabia's place in the world, in the region especially. I want to quickly ask you a question now. How do you see, Ambassador Sachdev, India-Saudi relations take shape going forward, and what might be some of the imperatives that might drive this relationship?
I think there is evident economic complementarity. They need to sell their oil. We need to buy that. They need to invest their money abroad, and we are in need of investments for infrastructure, especially in hydrocarbon sector downstream. I think there is a certain amount of commonality in approach towards Afghanistan, for example, because there are various issues such as Al-Qaeda, Islamic State making inroads into that country, etc., which worries us and worries Saudi Arabia. We have 7 million Indians in the Gulf, and insecurity in that part of the world is going to be a huge setback to us, as Iraq-Kuwait war of 1990 showed us.
Sure.
So there are common themes, and both of us believe ourselves to be status quo powers, and would like the current dispensation to be coagulated despite various shuffles around. I'm optimistic that the relationship would not only endure but would go forward.
Fair enough, Ambassador Sachdev. Prime Minister Modi traveled to Saudi Arabia last year. That was 6 years after the former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh traveled similarly to Saudi Arabia in the year 2010. And before that, several decades ago, we saw Indira Gandhi travel in 1982. And before that, the first Prime Minister, Mr. Nehru, traveled to Saudi Arabia as early as 1956. Now, looking at the bilateral relationship between India and Saudi Arabia in terms of, say, counter-terrorism, in terms of energy security, as you mentioned, Indian diaspora, what will be some of the key takeaways or areas to look forward or focus going forward, especially in the light of Prime Minister Modi's overtures to West Asia, all the countries in the region? He's been to Saudi Arabia, he's been to Iran, he's been to Gulf, he's been to the UAE, Qatar. We saw him make an overture to the UAE, for instance, and similarly with Saudi Arabia. How would that play out in India's context, in its neighborhood, given Pakistan's similar a converging relationship with some countries that we are discussing now?
I think on economic plane, the dynamics are very different between India and the Gulf, and Pakistan and the Gulf. Pakistan being a smaller economy, smaller population, smaller oil demand, etc., is no match for us. On the other hand, on the manpower front as well, Indians in the Gulf, including Saudi Arabia, outnumber Pakistanis by a factor of 2 to 1. So that also is not a competition mode. I should also add here that on July 4 last year, as you would recall, a bombing in 3 bombings in Saudi Arabia took place, and the most serious among them was bombing of at the US consulate in Jeddah, where a Pakistani Islamic State vanguard was found to be involved, and that has prompted a fairly serious scare of Islamic State coming through Pakistan, and even as long back as last month, Saudi security official declared that 40,000 Pakistanis have been deported for security reasons from Saudi Arabia. So that is something which worries them. I believe that when they look to future, there is certain amount of pressure on them to reduce the numbers of expatriates in general. So Indians are not immune. 3 million Indians that who live in Saudi Arabia are not immune to being whittled down. But chances are that the number of Indians may come down, but technical competences of Indians on average would go up, as Saudi Arabia requires more people who can help them transform their economy.
Fair enough. Daniele, US President Donald Trump has spoken about waging a decisive fight, as he put it, against the Islamic State. He's spoken about increasing the US defense spending going forward. How do you see Saudi Arabia's role in it, given that we heard Saudi Arabia forge a 35-member coalition against the ISIS a few years ago, but its role seems to be limited against a particular set of terrorists or militants operating in Yemen, for instance. So do you think Saudi Arabia's role needs or can be improved going forward? Do you think this is the best that Saudi Arabia can do under the circumstances?
No, I actually personally think it must improve, because I think that Saudi Arabia could play a very positive role.
So why is it that Saudi Arabia is hesitant or reluctant?
Again, I tell you, there is a hegemony struggle in the Middle East. It is pretty clear for me, and majorly is between Sunni and Shia powers. But let's not make a mistake, this has no religious ground. They define themselves through Shia and Sunni because it's more comfortable, is more suitable for them in order to advocate their role within the region, but it's all about political hegemony, military hegemony, and economic hegemony. So this is why, for the time being, Saudi Arabia has not proven to be a very reliable ally, or at least it doesn't seem that it's a very reliable ally for the United States, because we know that it has been proven that not directly the Saudi royal family, but prominent members of the establishment of Saudi Arabia openly funded Jabhat al-Nusra, which ultimately was a branch of Al-Qaeda active in Syria in order to overthrow President Bashar al-Assad, who's Shia, playing against the sectarian card. So if Saudi Arabia wants to become a positive element, they have to abandon their struggle for hegemony, at least this struggle for hegemony in the Middle East. That's the only way through which the United States and Saudi Arabia could cooperate to bring peace to the region.
All right, it was a fascinating conversation with my guest in the studio, Ambassador Sachdev. Daniele, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with me on Gravitas tonight. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Gravitas, but news continues here on WION. You can catch all the latest updates on our social media, mobile and digital platforms. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.